The cowboy lost his horse, but the next day the horse returned with an Apache woman on its back. John Miller was a cowboy through and through, a man whose life had always been tied to the wide, open plains of New Mexico. He had grown up near these lands, learning from his father the ways of the cattle, the horses, and the ever-changing weather. From a young age, he had understood that life on the plains was not easy. The winds could change in an instant, storms could appear without warning, and predators were always lurking. Yet, John loved every moment of it. The freedom of the open sky, the smell of the grass after a rainstorm, and the sound of hooves thundering across the plains were more precious to him than anything else. Among all the things John cherished, there was one companion he trusted above all others, his horse, Rusty. Rusty was no ordinary horse. He had been with John for many years, growing alongside him, learning the rhythms of the plains, and understanding his moods almost as well as any human could. Rusty had a reddish-brown coat that glowed in the sunlight, and eyes that seemed almost intelligent, full of understanding and loyalty. When John rode Rusty, he felt a connection that made him confident he could face any challenge the plains might throw his way. Rusty was his partner, his friend, and sometimes his only comfort in the lonely stretches of land that seemed endless. On one bright morning, John woke up to the familiar sounds of the ranch, the soft lowing of cows, the rustling of the wind through the tall grasses, and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. He stretched and rubbed the sleep from his eyes, preparing to start his day as usual. The first thing he did, as he did every morning, was head to the corral to check on Rusty. But when he opened the gate, a cold feeling ran down his spine. The corral was empty. Rusty was gone. At first, John thought maybe Rusty had wandered off into the nearby hills or had slipped through a gate he hadn't noticed. He called out his horse's name, his voice echoing across the plains. "Rusty, Rusty, here, boy," but there was no answer. Only the wind responded, carrying his calls into the vast openness. Panic began to creep in. Losing a horse in these lands was serious. Rusty was not just a horse for riding. He was John's companion for work, for travel, and for safety. Without Rusty, even simple tasks could become dangerous. The plains were full of hidden dangers, rattlesnakes, coyotes, and sometimes outlaws. John quickly saddled up another horse he kept nearby, a younger and less experienced colt, and began searching. He rode across the hills and valleys, calling Rusty's name over and over. His heart pounded as he scanned every ridge and ravine, every patch of brush and grass. Hours passed, and the sun climbed high into the sky, casting long shadows that stretched across the plains. John's concern grew with each passing moment. He remembered the times Rusty had saved him from danger, once guiding him away from a rattlesnake while he was crossing a creek, another time galloping ahead to warn him of a mountain lion hidden among the rocks. Rusty was more than a horse. He was a guardian in his own right. As the day went on, John's search took him farther from home. He knew the risks of wandering too far, but he couldn't abandon the thought that Rusty might be injured or lost. The plains, which usually seemed so familiar and safe, now felt vast and threatening. Every rustle of the grass, every shadow cast by the sun seemed suspicious. He imagined Rusty trapped in a thicket, or worse, caught by someone who might want to steal him. His mind raced with worry, and his hands grew sore from holding the reins too tightly. By late afternoon, John stopped at the top of a small ridge to catch his breath. He could see the ranch in the distance, but Rusty was nowhere in sight. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of wild sage and dust, but it brought no sign of his loyal companion. He dismounted and walked down the ridge, scanning the ground for hoof prints. Rusty's tracks were nowhere to be found. John's stomach sank. He had faced many challenges in his life, but the thought of losing Rusty was almost unbearable. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, John reluctantly decided to return to the ranch. He couldn't continue searching after dark. The plains were dangerous once the light disappeared, and he was alone. Saddling up the younger horse, he rode slowly, keeping his eyes on the distant hills, hoping against hope that he might spot a familiar reddish-brown figure. Every creak of the saddle and every sound from the grass made him tense, imagining Rusty's voice in every neigh and whinny he heard. When he finally reached the ranch, the evening calm was a stark contrast to the panic he had felt all day. He checked the corral again, called for Rusty, and waited. Night fell, and with it came silence. The stars began to sparkle in the sky, and the moon cast a gentle light over the plains. John sat on the fence, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing on his shoulders. He thought about Rusty, about the adventures they had shared, and about the bond that had grown stronger with each passing year. Could he have lost his companion forever? The thought was unbearable. Even as he went to bed that night, sleep came reluctantly. His mind kept replaying the day's search, the empty spaces where Rusty should have been, and the countless dangers that might have befallen him. Yet, deep down, John held onto a small glimmer of hope. He knew Rusty was clever and brave. The horse had survived harsh winters, storms, and even dangerous encounters with wild animals. Somehow, he believed Rusty would find his way back, no matter how far or difficult the journey. By the time the first hints of dawn appeared in the sky, John was already awake, restless and anxious. He couldn't wait until morning to search again. The plains waited for no one, and every hour could make a difference. He dressed quickly, grabbed his hat, and stepped outside. The air was cool and crisp, and the world seemed peaceful, almost as if the plains themselves were holding their breath. John's thoughts were consumed with one thing: Rusty. Where had he gone? Had he wandered too far, or had something unexpected happened? John saddled up the younger horse once more, ready to resume his search. He knew that whatever the day held, he had to be patient, careful, and watchful. The bond he shared with Rusty was too important to give up hope. As he rode into the rising sun, scanning every hill, valley, and creek, he reminded himself of the countless times they had faced challenges together and overcome them. This time would be no different, he hoped, even if he didn't yet know the incredible surprise the plains had in store. The next morning, John rose before the sun had fully touched the plains. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of dew and wild grasses. His mind was still filled with worry about Rusty, but he refused to let fear control him. With a deep breath, he saddled up the younger horse once again and set out toward the hills where he had last seen his beloved companion. Every step of the horse on the soft earth seemed to echo his anxious thoughts. He scanned every ridge and valley, every shadow and patch of brush, hoping to catch even a glimpse of Rusty's reddish-brown coat. As he rode further than he ever had before, the plains began to open into wide stretches of rolling hills and scattered trees. Birds rose into the sky, startled by his presence, and the wind whispered through the tall grasses. John kept calling Rusty's name, his voice carrying across the quiet landscape. "Rusty, here boy, Rusty," he shouted, trying not to let despair creep in. Hours passed, and just when he began to wonder if he might have to return home empty-handed, a familiar sound reached his ears. It was the soft sound of hooves striking the earth, not the clumsy steps of the young horse he rode, but the sure, confident gallop of Rusty. John's heart leapt into his chest. He raised his eyes to a distant ridge, and there, moving gracefully through the grass, was Rusty. Relief washed over him, so strong that he almost forgot to breathe. But then John's eyes widened in astonishment. Rusty was not alone. On Rusty's back sat a figure John had never expected to see. It was a woman, tall and strong, with dark hair flowing freely over her shoulders and deep, thoughtful eyes that seemed to study everything around her. Her clothes were simple but clearly handmade, with patterns that reminded John of the stories he had heard of the Apache people. She sat with perfect balance, as if the horse and she were one, moving together naturally through the hills. John slowed his horse and watched in awe. He had never encountered anyone like her, and yet there was something calm and dignified about her presence. As he approached cautiously, Rusty slowed, recognizing his master. He neighed softly and stopped, his ears flicking back and forth as he looked at John. The woman on his back did not flinch. She seemed to understand that John was not a threat. Her eyes met his, steady and unafraid, and she gave a small nod. John dismounted slowly, unsure of what to do or say. His mind raced. Who was she? How had she come to be riding Rusty? And most importantly, was she alone? The woman lifted her hand in a simple gesture of greeting, and John returned it cautiously. He remembered the stories his father had told him about the Apache, proud, brave people who lived by the land and were fiercely protective of their families and communities. He realized that this woman must have survived alone in the wilderness, relying on her own skills and courage. That thought filled him with both respect and curiosity. How long had she been out there? How had she managed to find food and water? And how had Rusty come to her aid? For a moment they simply stared at each other, the quiet stretching across the hills. Then slowly John began to speak in simple words, hoping she might understand. "Are you okay?" he asked. She tilted her head slightly, then mimicked drinking water from her hands and pointed toward a nearby stream. John nodded, understanding her meaning. She had been thirsty. She gestured again toward the hills, then made a motion like walking with her feet. John realized she had been traveling, moving across the plains, likely searching for safety or her people. Rusty, as if sensing the tension, shifted slightly beneath her, stamping his hooves softly on the ground. John reached out to pat his horse's neck, feeling a deep connection and gratitude for his companion's loyalty. Rusty had stayed with her, protecting her during the night, guiding her through the rough terrain. John felt a mix of amazement and relief. His horse had not only returned to him, but had brought someone in need of help safely to the plains. The loyalty and intelligence of Rusty were almost beyond belief. The woman finally spoke a few words in a language John did not understand. Her voice was calm, but it carried a strength that was impossible to ignore. John shook his head, realizing communication would be difficult, but he wasn't discouraged. He had faced many challenges on the plains, and he could figure this one out too. He pointed to himself and said, "John." She looked at him and nodded, repeating the sound softly, "John." Then she pointed to herself, saying, "Ayana." John repeated the name carefully, smiling. "Ayana," he said. The name meant eternal bloom, he would later learn, and it seemed fitting for someone so strong and resilient. They spent the morning establishing a basic understanding, using gestures, drawings in the dirt, and simple words. Yana showed John how she had survived in the wilderness, collecting water from hidden streams, finding edible plants, and avoiding dangers such as snakes and wild animals. John listened intently, impressed by her resourcefulness. She also indicated, through gestures, that Rusty had guided her through the night, staying close and keeping her safe. John felt a swell of pride and gratitude. Rusty had always been brave, but this act of loyalty and protection was extraordinary. As the day wore on, John offered Ayana some food and water. She accepted gratefully, eating with a quiet dignity that reminded John of the stories he had heard about Apache hospitality and resilience. They began to move together toward the ranch, with Rusty leading the way. John stayed close, careful not to startle her, while Ayana maintained a calm and watchful posture atop the horse. The plains seemed alive with the rustle of grass and the songs of birds, yet a sense of shared understanding grew between them. Despite the barriers of language and culture, trust was forming slowly but surely. Along the way, John noticed the subtle ways Ayana interacted with Rusty. She seemed to understand his moods, his body language, and even his small gestures. Rusty responded to her as if she had been riding him for years, and John realized that the bond between the two was remarkable. He had never seen his horse so attuned to anyone else. It was clear that they had been through challenges together, perhaps even life-threatening ones. Respect and gratitude filled John's heart, not just for Rusty, but for Ayanna, whose courage had allowed them to find each other in the vast wilderness. By mid-afternoon, they reached a small clearing with a creek where John decided to rest. He helped Ayanna down from Rusty, and they sat together near the water. She gestured to the sky, indicating how she had navigated using the sun and the stars. John nodded, fascinated by her knowledge. He shared stories of the ranch, of the cattle, and the routines of life on the plains. Even with their limited communication, a sense of companionship began to take root. They were strangers in some ways, yet their shared experience of survival and trust created a bond that neither fully understood but both appreciated. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, John realized that today had been unlike any other in his life. Rusty had returned, not alone but with someone who needed help, and through that unexpected encounter, John's perspective on the plains, on trust, and on courage was shifting. He knew that the days ahead would be filled with learning, understanding, and perhaps challenges, but for now, he allowed himself to feel hope and amazement. The plains had tested him, as they always did, but they had also given him an extraordinary gift, a chance to witness loyalty, bravery, and humanity in the most unexpected form. Over the next few days, John and Ayanna slowly began to understand each other. Communication was difficult at first, since their languages were different, but they quickly realized that words were not the only way to share thoughts and feelings. Gestures, expressions, and simple drawings in the dirt became their primary tools. John would draw a sun to ask about the time of day or a circle of water to ask about drinking. Ayanna would respond by pointing to the creek, mimicking the act of drinking, or using hand signals to show how she had traveled and survived. At first it was slow, but over time, a rhythm emerged. They learned to read each other, just as Rusty had learned to read them both. John found himself fascinated by Ayanna's skills. She had survived alone in the wilderness, and it was clear she had faced challenges that John could hardly imagine. She showed him how she had identified edible plants and roots, how she had tracked animals for food, and even how she had hidden herself when dangers appeared. John watched carefully, impressed by her knowledge and bravery. He realized that her time alone had made her strong, patient, and incredibly resourceful. There was a quiet confidence in her movements and decisions, a calmness that came from living in the wild and learning to rely on herself. Ayanna, in turn, seemed curious about John's life on the ranch. She pointed to the cattle grazing nearby and asked questions with gestures and expressions. John showed her how he marked the cows, how he guided them from one pasture to another, and how he tended to their injuries or illnesses. She watched intently, nodding and making small sounds that seemed like approval. Though she could not speak his language, her eyes and her gestures communicated understanding. John began to see her not just as a stranger or a survivor, but as a teacher in her own right. She had lessons to share, and he found himself learning from her every day. Rusty played a crucial role in their growing bond. The horse seemed to understand both of them perfectly, moving calmly beneath Ayanna and responding immediately to John's gentle commands. When Ayanna dismounted, Rusty would stay close to her, nudging her softly as if checking that she was safe. John marveled at the loyalty and intelligence of his horse. Rusty had been with him for years, but now he seemed to grow even more perceptive, recognizing the needs and emotions of the woman who had been brought into their lives by fate. Together, the three of them formed a small, unlikely team navigating the challenges of the plains. As the days passed, John and Ayanna ventured further from the ranch. They explored the hills, valleys, and small streams, learning from each other and discovering the strengths they shared. John taught Ayanna how to handle cattle, showing her how to rope and guide them safely. She learned quickly, her natural agility and patience making her adept at the work. John was amazed at how fast she adapted, and he realized that her life in the wilderness had prepared her well for tasks that required both skill and careful observation. Ayanna, in return, taught John lessons that went beyond physical survival. She showed him how to observe the land with new eyes, how to notice subtle signs in the grass, the trees, and the clouds that indicated changes in weather or the presence of animals. She taught him patience, pointing to a bird or an insect and mimicking the careful attention she had used in the wild. John listened carefully, trying to match her focus, and slowly he began to see the plains in a new way. It was no longer just his home or his workplace. It was a living, breathing world full of secrets and lessons waiting to be discovered. Their days were filled with small adventures and challenges. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept across the plains, dark clouds rolling in and the wind picking up with force. John and Ayanna quickly found shelter under a rocky overhang, Rusty standing calmly beside them. Lightning flashed across the sky, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Ayanna remained composed, demonstrating how to stay safe during sudden weather changes. John felt a deep admiration for her courage and knowledge. He realized that while he had grown up on the plains, he still had much to learn, and her presence made him better at reading and respecting the land. Evenings were quieter, and in these moments, their bond grew stronger in ways words could not express. They would sit by the creek, watching the reflection of the stars in the water, and share stories through gestures and drawings. Ayanna would draw symbols of her travels, and John would mimic scenes from the ranch. Sometimes they simply sat in silence, understanding each other through the calmness of the night and the shared experiences of the day. Rusty would rest nearby, occasionally nudging them as if reminding them of his constant presence and loyalty. John began to realize that trust was growing between them. He trusted her judgment and her instincts, knowing she could handle herself in difficult situations. She, in turn, trusted him to protect her and to guide them safely through the plains. The unusual circumstances of their meeting had created an unspoken bond, built on respect, reliance, and a shared understanding of the dangers and beauties of life on the plains. Neither had expected to meet the other, yet both had found companionship and strength in the unexpected friendship. Ayanna's presence also began to change John in ways he had not anticipated. He found himself more observant, more patient, and more aware of the small details around him. The plains, which he had once taken for granted, now seemed full of life and subtle messages. He appreciated Rusty even more, marveling at how the horse had not only returned to him but had protected and guided Ayanna as well. John realized that survival was not just about strength and skill. It was about trust, observation, and learning from those around you. Their days together were not without challenges. Sometimes, wild animals appeared unexpectedly, forcing them to react quickly. Other times, the terrain itself became difficult, with steep hills or hidden creeks testing their skills and endurance. Each time, they relied on each other's strengths and instincts. John would guide Rusty while Ayanna helped identify safe paths and warning signs. Rusty, always alert, responded to both of them, making the journey safer and smoother. These shared challenges strengthened their bond, turning mutual respect into a genuine friendship that neither had expected. Through all of this, John could not help but feel a sense of wonder at the circumstances that had brought them together. Rusty had returned not just to him, but with someone who had clearly needed help. Ayanna had survived against odds that would have defeated many others, and her presence reminded John of the resilience and courage that existed in people when they were determined to survive. He admired her silently, grateful for the lessons she had shared and the companionship she had offered. By the end of several days, John realized that their friendship had become something remarkable. They could communicate in ways that transcended language, relying on gestures, understanding, and shared experiences. Rusty, ever loyal, had become a bridge between them, guiding their interactions and offering silent reassurance. Together, the three of them had formed an unlikely but harmonious team, navigating the challenges of the plains while learning from each other. In the quiet moments, John often thought about what had happened. The plains had taken Rusty from him, only to return him with Ayanna, a stranger who had survived against incredible odds. It was a reminder that life was unpredictable, sometimes harsh, but also capable of delivering unexpected gifts. John understood that the days ahead would continue to test their skills, patience, and trust, but he felt ready for whatever challenges they might face together. For the first time in his life, he realized that companionship, trust, and shared experience were just as important as strength, skill, and knowledge. As the days turned into weeks, John and Ayanna's friendship grew stronger, shaped by shared experiences and the endless challenges of the plains. Each morning they would rise before dawn, the sky painted in soft shades of orange and pink, and set out together. Rusty, ever loyal, was always at their side, carrying Ayanna with calm confidence or following John through the rugged trails. Life on the plains was never easy, and yet, with each passing day, John felt a growing sense of gratitude for the unusual bond they had formed. Their mornings were filled with work and learning. John would guide Ayanna through the daily routines of ranch life, showing her how to care for the cattle, mend fences, and check for signs of sickness or injury among the animals. Ayanna listened intently, her dark eyes following his every move. She was quick to grasp the tasks, demonstrating a natural patience and attention to detail. John was impressed by her adaptability. It was clear that her life in the wilderness had honed skills that complemented those he had learned on the ranch. Together they worked efficiently, moving from one task to another, Rusty often helping by carrying supplies or guiding the cattle. Despite the hard work, there were moments of quiet reflection. Sometimes they would pause by a creek, watching the water flow over smooth stones, or sit under the shade of a tree, listening to the wind rustle through the grasses. In these moments, words were not necessary. They communicated through gestures, glances, and a shared understanding that had grown from trust and experience. John found that these quiet times were some of the most meaningful. He felt a deep respect for Ayanna, not just for her skills, but for her resilience and courage. She had faced countless dangers alone, yet she carried herself with dignity and strength. Rusty remained a constant presence, bridging the gap between John and Ayanna. The horse seemed to understand them both completely, moving calmly under Ayanna when she rode, and responding instantly to John's commands. At night, Rusty would often nudge them gently, as if reminding them of his loyalty and watchfulness. John had always known Rusty was a special horse, but seeing him interact with Ayanna revealed an even deeper intelligence and sensitivity. Rusty had not only protected her, but had helped foster the trust that now existed between them. Their afternoons were often filled with exploration. John would lead the way through hills, valleys, and hidden trails, while Ayanna pointed out subtle signs in the landscape, tracks of animals, hidden sources of water, or safe paths through difficult terrain. John marveled at her knowledge of the land, realizing that her experience in the wilderness gave her insights he had never considered. In turn, John showed her the ways of the ranch, teaching her how to handle livestock, repair equipment, and navigate by the sun and stars. Each day was a balance of learning, teaching, and discovery, strengthening both their skills and their bond. Occasionally, challenges arose that tested their patience and courage. One afternoon, while crossing a rocky ridge, they encountered a sudden storm. Dark clouds rolled in, lightning flashed across the sky, and wind whipped fiercely through the grasses. John and Ayanna quickly found shelter under a large rock outcrop, Rusty standing calmly beside them. Ayanna demonstrated how to remain safe during the storm, showing John where to position themselves and how to avoid dangerous footing. John was grateful for her knowledge, realizing that her time in the wilderness had prepared her to face the elements with calm and confidence. Together, they waited out the storm, learning from each other's instincts and decisions. Evenings were a time for reflection and bonding. After the work of the day, they would sit by the fire or beside the creek, sharing stories through gestures and drawings. Ayanna would draw maps of her travels, showing the mountains, rivers, and forests she had crossed. John would respond with sketches of the ranch, the cattle, and the routines of life on the plains. Sometimes they simply sat in silence, watching the stars appear in the night sky, feeling a deep connection that went beyond words. The trust and friendship they had developed allowed them to communicate in ways that transcended language, building a foundation that neither had anticipated. John began to notice subtle changes in himself as well. He had always been independent, used to relying on his own skills and judgment, but Ayanna's presence made him more observant, patient, and reflective. He learned to notice small details in the environment, from the way the grass bent under the wind to the distant call of birds signaling changes in weather. Ayanna's perspective opened his eyes to new ways of seeing the plains, teaching him that survival was not just about strength or experience, but about awareness, adaptability, and cooperation. Their friendship also deepened through shared humor and small acts of kindness. Ayanna would sometimes mimic John's exaggerated gestures when explaining a task, making him laugh despite the seriousness of their work. John, in turn, would tease Rusty gently when the horse acted stubborn or playful, and Ayanna would join in the laughter, creating moments of lightness and joy. These small interactions helped them bond even further, reminding them that even in the harshest environment, there was room for companionship, laughter, and human connection. Over time, John realized that Ayanna had become more than just a companion. She had become a part of his daily life, a presence that brought comfort, strength, and insight. He admired her courage, her knowledge, and her calm determination. He also began to understand the importance of trust in each other, in Rusty, and in the unpredictable nature of the plains. Their experiences together had shown him that survival and success were not just about individual skill, but about relying on others and building relationships based on respect and understanding. The local townspeople began to notice the changes as well. They watched with curiosity and, in some cases, amazement as John and Ayanna worked side by side, moving through the plains with confidence and harmony. Some were wary at first, unfamiliar with Ayanna and unsure of her intentions, but John's calm presence and her composed demeanor earned their respect. They saw a partnership built on mutual respect and trust, one that defied cultural barriers and expectations. John and Ayanna had become a living example of cooperation and friendship, demonstrating that shared goals and mutual understanding could bridge even the widest divides. As the days passed, the bond between John and Ayanna grew into something unspoken yet undeniable. They had faced storms, navigated difficult terrain, cared for livestock, and learned from each other's knowledge and experience. Through it all, Rusty remained the silent but steadfast third member of their team, offering loyalty, guidance, and protection. John often reflected on how extraordinary it was that a single horse could bring two people together, creating a connection that had changed their lives forever. By the end of several weeks, John realized that the plains had given him a rare gift. Yana's friendship had taught him lessons he had never expected, lessons about trust, resilience, patience, and the value of shared experience. He had learned to see the land differently, to observe carefully, and to respect the knowledge and skills of others. Most importantly, he had learned that human connection could form in the most unexpected ways, even in the vast, unpredictable wilderness. Evenings became moments of quiet gratitude. Sitting beside the creek or watching the sun dip below the horizon, John felt a deep appreciation for the bond they had built. He thought about Rusty, who had returned to him with Ayana, changing the course of their lives forever. He thought about Ayana, who had faced incredible challenges, and yet had become a teacher, friend, and equal partner in navigating the plains. And he thought about himself, realizing that his life had grown richer and more meaningful through this unexpected encounter. John knew that life on the plains would continue to present challenges, but he felt ready. Together, he, Ayana, and Rusty had faced danger, uncertainty, and the harsh elements, emerging stronger and more connected. Their trust and friendship had been tested and proven resilient. He understood that the days ahead would bring new experiences, but with Ayana by his side and Rusty guiding them, he felt a renewed sense of confidence and hope. In those quiet moments, John reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with the loss of his horse. Rusty had been gone for only a day, yet that day had changed everything. The plains had given him an unexpected companion, a teacher, and a friend. He realized that life had a way of surprising those who were willing to face its challenges with courage and an open heart. And as the stars appeared in the night sky, John felt a quiet certainty that their friendship, built on trust, respect, and shared experience, would endure no matter what the future held. As the weeks passed, it became clear to John and Ayana that their time together, though precious, could not last forever. Ayana had spoken little of her tribe, but through gestures and drawings, John began to understand that she longed to return to her people. She had survived alone in the wilderness for so long, yet the connection to her family and community remained strong. John understood her need to go, even though a part of him wished she could stay. The bond they had formed was rare and special, but he knew that life had its own plans. One morning, Ayana approached John and pointed toward the distant mountains. She traced a path with her finger and mimicked walking and traveling, showing that she wished to return to her tribe. John nodded, though his heart felt heavy. He had grown deeply attached to her, and Rusty had been their constant companion, sharing in their days of work, learning, and adventure. The thought of letting her go was difficult, yet he understood the importance of honoring her choice. He could not ask her to remain if it meant leaving her people behind. In the days leading up to her departure, John and Ayana spent as much time together as possible. They rode across the plains, explored hidden valleys, and shared meals by the creek. Rusty remained by their side, as loyal and steady as ever. John took every opportunity to show Ayana the routines and rhythms of ranch life, while Ayana continued to teach him lessons about survival, observation, and patience. Their friendship had grown into something deep and meaningful, a connection built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. Every moment together felt precious, as though they both understood the value of the time they had left. As the day of departure approached, John began to prepare for Ayana's journey. He gathered supplies including water, food, and blankets, and helped her pack them carefully. Rusty seemed to sense the importance of the moment, standing quietly as if acknowledging the significance of what was about to happen. Ayana worked efficiently, her movements calm and purposeful, yet there was a softness in her eyes that revealed the emotions she could not express in words. John felt a mix of pride, admiration, and sadness, recognizing the strength and determination of the woman who had become such an important part of his life. On the morning of her departure, the sky was painted with soft shades of orange and gold. The air was crisp and still, carrying the faint scent of the plains. John helped Ayanna onto Rusty, ensuring she was secure and comfortable. Rusty nuzzled her gently, as if saying goodbye in his own way. John felt a lump in his throat, realizing that this was the culmination of weeks of shared experiences, challenges, and discoveries. He had grown to care for Ayanna deeply, and letting her go was one of the hardest things he had ever faced. Before she left, they spent a quiet moment together by the creek. John handed her a small bundle of supplies and gestured toward the mountains, encouraging her to travel safely. Ayanna nodded, her dark eyes meeting his with a depth of understanding that transcended words. She reached out and touched his arm briefly, a simple gesture of gratitude and friendship. John responded with a nod and a small smile, trying to convey everything he felt in that moment: respect, admiration, and a deep sense of connection. Rusty shifted his weight, stamping softly, as if sensing the emotional weight of the farewell. As Ayanna guided Rusty toward the mountains, John watched silently, his heart heavy yet full of hope for her journey. He knew she was strong, resourceful, and capable, but he could not help but worry for her safety. The plains could be unforgiving, and the path to her tribe would be long and challenging. Yet he also knew that she had faced greater dangers before, and that her courage and intelligence would see her through. He felt a quiet pride, knowing that he had played a small part in her journey, and that their friendship had been a source of support and strength for both of them. As the distance between them grew, John's thoughts drifted to the experiences they had shared. He remembered the first moment Rusty returned with Ayanna on his back, the shock and awe he had felt, and the curiosity that had grown into respect and friendship. He thought of the days spent learning from each other, exploring the plains, and facing challenges together. Every shared smile, gesture, and moment of understanding had strengthened their bond, creating memories that would last a lifetime. Though she was leaving, John knew that the lessons, trust, and friendship they had built would remain with him forever. Rusty, ever loyal, seemed to understand the farewell as well. The horse trotted alongside Ayanna, careful and protective, guiding her across the uneven terrain. John watched them disappear into the distance, the mountains slowly swallowing the figures of his companion and his horse. A quiet sadness settled over him, but it was accompanied by gratitude and a sense of awe. The plains had brought him an extraordinary friendship, one that had changed the way he saw the world and the people around him. He knew that life would continue, but he also knew that this experience had left an indelible mark on his heart. In the days following Ayanna's departure, John found himself reflecting on the time they had spent together. He rode Rusty across the plains, noticing details he had never paid attention to before: the subtle movements of animals, the signs of approaching weather, and the quiet patterns of the land. He realized that Ayanna's presence had opened his eyes to the depth and complexity of the world around him. He had learned patience, observation, and the value of trust, not just in people, but in the animals and land that were his companions. John also reflected on the importance of connection and friendship. Ayanna had shown him that relationships could form in unexpected ways, even between strangers from different worlds. The lessons she had shared, about resilience, courage, and understanding, stayed with him, influencing his actions and decisions. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that the bond they had created was not dependent on proximity or constant presence. Friendship, he realized, could endure across distances and time, leaving a lasting impact on those who experienced it. Weeks turned into months, and John continued his life on the ranch. Rusty remained by his side, faithful and dependable as ever. Yet the memory of Ayanna lingered, a reminder of the extraordinary days they had shared. He often thought about her courage, intelligence, and kindness, and the way she had navigated the plains with strength and grace. He felt gratitude for the chance encounter that had brought them together, understanding that life had a way of delivering unexpected gifts to those who were open to them. One evening, as John sat by the creek, watching the sun set over the hills, he thought about the journey that had begun with the loss of his horse. What had seemed like a simple misfortune had turned into a life-changing experience. Rusty's loyalty had brought Ayanna into his life, and together they had formed a bond that transcended language, culture, and circumstance. John realized that the plains, with all their challenges and beauty, had taught him lessons that no book or teacher ever could. Though Ayanna had returned to her people, her influence on John's life remained strong. He continued to ride the plains with Rusty, but now with a deeper appreciation for the land, the animals, and the unexpected friendships that could arise in the most unlikely places. He carried the lessons of patience, observation, trust, and courage into every aspect of his life, knowing that these qualities had been strengthened by the time he had spent with Ayanna. Their friendship, though no longer physical, remained alive in his heart and memories. In quiet moments, John would look to the distant mountains, imagining Ayanna riding with Rusty, returning to her tribe and the community she had missed. He felt a mix of sadness and joy, sadness for her absence, but joy in knowing she was safe, strong, and capable. Their parting had not been an ending, but a transition, a recognition that life moves forward, and that the bonds formed through trust and shared experiences could endure even across distance. John understood, finally, that the plains were more than just a home. They were a teacher, a place of challenge, and a source of unexpected connections. The experience with Ayanna had shown him the depth of human resilience and the importance of trust, not only in people, but in the animals and land that surrounded him. Rusty remained his steadfast companion, a living reminder of loyalty and courage, and the extraordinary journey that had begun with the simple act of a horse returning home. Though Ayanna had gone, John carried her presence in his heart. He knew that someday, perhaps, their paths might cross again, but even if they did not, the impact of their friendship would remain. The lessons, laughter, and shared adventures had become part of his life, shaping the man he had become. John had learned that life's surprises often came in the most unexpected forms, and that friendship, trust, and courage could flourish even in the harshest and most unpredictable places. And so, with Rusty at his side, John continued to ride the plains, forever changed by the extraordinary days he had shared with Ayanna. He had lost nothing in the experience, only gained lessons, memories, and a friendship that would endure in his heart forever. The plains stretched endlessly before him, filled with challenges, beauty, and the promise of new adventures, but John faced them with a renewed spirit, grateful for the past, confident in the present, and hopeful for whatever the future might hold.